further, I'm really sort of hoping that, you guys get a lot out of this, right? So let us get through the first few questions, and then please ask questions of your own. Sound all right? So, Sam, why don't I send this out to you? I mean, mobile payments has like a unique challenge of having multiple payment methods associated with it, both point of sale and in-app. I mean, what are the security or fraud challenges, you and your customers face, like when you're sort of speaking to them about those multiple methods?
That's a great question. But
It is a great question. Thank you.
there's drastic differences. In-app payments or cloud payments or card-on-file payments have different risks, and there's a lot of good systems for that. Using an app for acceptance is quite the opposite because it's out there, it's in the wild, and that's why you see these legacy large HSM devices like the Verifone readers and these readers, because the amount of security required is very stringent. So it's very different. If you do a mobile app for acceptance, you have a higher burden than you do for a cloud-based payment.
Michelle, I saw you shaking your head. Do you want to plus that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, again, as Sean introduced, it's like I have the responsibility at Verizon in the enterprise space, and we focus on retail, hospitality, and distribution. That's the vertical practice that my team and I lead. And I think that where it comes together is it's striking the right balance between creating a secure application or platform for consumers to engage in, but also making it frictionless for that consumer who's wanting to complete that transaction. And I think we've seen the intersection, with the physical environment moving to e-commerce and now mobile commerce is just really striking the right balance of how do you secure what needs to be secured, but also how do you create a platform that's really conducive to what you want from a brand perspective, but also ease of use for making those transactions and driving money within.
And so, Ian, like at least at Feedzai, how are you guys trying to think about that sort of user-facing, that business case for security, right? So those business use cases. Go ahead.
Sure. I'd also like to say a little bit about, while all the payment types may be different, the way that we approach it at Feedzai really is more of a sort of broad-scale data integration. And so the way we would talk about it is more about integrating the actual use cases and payment types across all the channels. And the reason why we want to do that actually is so we can actually do better fraud detection by looking across all the data that you actually have, rather than just concentrating on some single thing in a single area. So Feedzai is a machine learning company, and our piece is really...
Don't forget to give the pitch. Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm going to give a little bit of the pitch now, but it's a machine learning company, and really we're focused at the final part of decision in the chain. Really, when you've done all the other security measures, and now you're looking at things like the behavioral data. And so, sure, but you actually want to look at all behavioral data points across all channels, because that's going to give you the best signal for fraud detection, whether it's account takeover or identity theft or something like that.
I mean, Sam, that's a really specific sort of way to think about security, not in terms of like actually securing the application, but thinking about security more in terms of fraud, right? I mean, is that how most customers you think are approaching it?
There are two different angles. I think we come at it from very different
for sure.
spaces. So there is a reason that a Verizon phone has a SIM card. That's on-device security. That's deterministic security. There's a good reason that you have a platform for risk management and detection at the back end. The combination of the two is what you want. And in terms of mobile banking apps, mobile payments apps, the levels of security required allows you to use devices like Apple, where the secure container of Apple is the actual trust zone of the Qualcomm chip. Once you start looking at acceptance, what's in the market is really legacy devices that are HSM-like. This has not yet moved to become something you can do easily on a phone or a Linux device or a tablet.
Yeah. I mean, so given, Michelle, given that bifurcated problem, I mean, what does the buying center look like inside of your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's first of all, it's across the entire C-suite. I think there's been plenty of conversations that solely, if there was a breach or there was incidents or there was data that was exposed, it fell squarely on the shoulders of the CISO. And what we've seen is that the evolution has changed, that it's not just the CISO, it's the CIO in collaboration with the chief revenue officer, the chief digital officer. And the other growing trend that we've seen since some of the largest breaches that have happened in the last 5 years is the expectations that the board of directors have.
Sure.
in terms of understanding what the practice is, where's there risk, where's there's exposure, and then when and if something does happen, what's the remediation plan, in terms of engaging everything from attorneys to corporate communications and everything, so.
I mean, Ian, are you seeing sort of that elevation in for going from technical buyers to economic buyers?
Yes, I would say so. And, the securing of the entire chain is something that's kind of the entire C-suite's problem. That said, commonly the feeds eye company is typically working with the chief risk officer, and because we're a bit more focused in on the actual payment itself and that behavioral data about the payment, as I was saying. That said, we have seen a sort of more of an exploration of broader roles within the company as we start to build out that 360-degree use case view that I was talking about, where you really are integrating all the data together and using that as a general risk platform for securing all your activities, including things like account logins and so on.
So I mean, is there, and Sam, I'm going to get to you because.
No, but this is a little bit enterprise.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
there's a big difference between what you guys said, which is specific to the enterprise. In terms of merchant, acquirer, and issuing bank, it doesn't work like that. There's rules for liability shift. There are rules for who pays for risk. And it's very different than enterprise security. So I just want to make sure I don't
of
confuse
course. But
anybody.
even in enterprise security, right? Like there's sort of convergence of these roles. Like in Capital One, which is an apt example for many reasons, there's a single identity team. Inside of Citi, there's this idea of a cyber fusion center in which fraud is integrated. Right?
That's correct. But once you start actually issuing a card or an acceptance device, it's a very different story. There's EMV code, there's other things.
Sure.
I'm just trying to make sure we don't.
No,
make
for
some-
sure.
yeah.
But go ahead. Ian.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and I think what Sam's talking about is it's defense in depth, right? And so,
Sure.
at each layer you've got different things. And I think what Sam's talking about there is that in a single channel, you have the different features and security measures that are present in that particular channel. And as I said, we're not active down at that level of the sort of solution. We're talking about when the data points come to us, we're looking at more of a unified solution across all the different things. So the two views are complementary is the way I would
Yeah, of
position it,
course.
Sean, if that makes sense.
And some of the
Go
security components would work for both. It's just the cycle of who's responsible, the CISO in the enterprise case. In the merchant case, there's merchant responsibility, there's fraud shift, there's liability shift between the merchant and the issuer, acquirer. It's a very different book of rules.
But so why don't I reframe the question, right? So there is this thing called mobile payments, right? There's this large digitization, the way that we pay, right?
Sure.
Are those siloed approaches to purchasing security, right? To purchasing security and employing security solutions, or even fraud solutions, are they staying the same, or are they changing, right? Is
There are
there more
different
collaborative?
there are different stacks.
And
different,
I understand, but
different rules.
yeah, but at what level are those things changing, if they're changing at all for any of your customers? You can say no. It's not changing.
I'll give an example. So fraud detection and remote management works well for connected systems that are connected all the time. Once you have a device that can be in the wild or offline and is allowed to transact offline, then you have to have both on device and cloud. Cloud is when you connect back, so
Sure.
you can put policies in. But offline, you have to be able to use your device to pay inside a safe way where you don't have connectivity, or in a tunnel, or in a car, or in a plane. In that case, the cloud is not existing. So
Yeah.
everything you do has to be deterministic rather than analytical. So there's different stacks for different things.
Michelle, you
Yeah.
look like you want to plus this.
So the question was around whether it's changing and
Yeah,
and
like
the
whether
answer is
those
just-
organization not at a technical and tactical level,
Yes.
but in terms of strategic.
Absolutely, it's changing. And again, when you look at the number of breaches and you look at the number of instances that have happened over time, they had no choice but to change.
For sure.
Because of the, I think recently one of the major breaches, the amount of money that was paid again in the hospitality industry, it was, it's 120 million, over 120 million, what they publicly talked about. So again, when you look at the amount of money and the exposure, going back to your point about risk, who owns it, you've seen the shift in ownership of risk, the value of what it is in terms of the impact of risk, and then also the association that it has with your brand. So for to say that it hasn't changed, I think is absolutely, it's not the evolution that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely say that, of course, it has changed, and it's changed towards this sort of integrated use case view. So, you need to look at identity, of course, and integrate that data up front in the account origination cycle, opening cycle. You need to then look at using some of that data and those data points in the transactional screening cycle. and really all the way across through all the measures, and think of that as a sort of integrated whole that leverages all those data points at once. And that's very much how we would view it. More data makes better machine learning models and makes better performance.
Michelle, just coming back to you, I mean, and talking specifically about payment security, right?
Mhm.
Because it's difficult to figure out who owns that in different types of organizations. I mean, who do you think is doing the best job? I think to Sam's point, it's difficult to understand
it is,
who
and I
really
think-
owns that risk because it's really like a customer by customer or an organization by organization. It's not, Sam?
Well,
Tell me.
if you go, we're talking about different topics. I don't want to confuse anybody.
Yeah,
If
sure.
you swipe a card at Safeway,
Sure.
it's well known and defined who owns the risk.
Sure.
And
but in
it's well
terms of-
known, defined who gets the chargeback. And it's well defined what the interchange rate are.
Sure.
And it's well defined who tests the device, who tests the card, who tests the acceptance device. So you guys are discussing enterprise. I'm not an expert on that. So
Okay.
payments that you use in the field has very strict rules, and the risk is owned by the intermediary, which is Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. Is that fair?
Right, so I think, again, what I would say is what you're describing is the transaction, and
Yeah,
would
exactly.
agree that the risk, so again, there's multiple layers of that process. And I guess what we're saying is what I'm saying is the implications of when that data is compromised.
Oh,
The
you're talking
impact
about
that it-
breaches.
Well,
I'm talking about credit card acceptance or
Right,
or
but the-
global
but again, the
payments.
there- yeah,
transactions,
but,
yeah.
but within these organizations, right? I mean, is there a way, like, are issuers now thinking about more tightly integrating or collaborating with other ecosystem partners? Like, is the way your customers are thinking about
Of course, I mean,
mobile
of course.
payment
So
security
there are
changing?
feeds of risk that people grab from everywhere they can. Carriers actually provide a huge amount of this data to Visa and others.
Absolutely.
And it's normally about your subscriber, their payment activities, and all of that. But by the end of the day, once they've supplied that to the issuing bank, only the issuer and the acquirer are actually sharing risk. Visa, the way they conduct their business all for trillions of dollars, is they have escrow money from both types of banks, and that's where they divide that. The feeds come from everywhere, including the carriers, but the responsibility never. So if somebody tries to pay Verizon their subscription fee and they don't, or they fail, you guys terminate the service, you look at your risk system. But the Visa card transaction, if it was fraudulent, you get your money back from Visa. So that's what I'm trying to delineate.
Ian, are you seeing more modes of collaboration between ecosystem partners in terms of like data feeds?
Yes, very much so. So we actually have a product in this area. We call it Risk Ledger, and by the way, it's not a blockchain thing.
Not yet.
Not
yet, anyway.
Give it away.
But basically, what we're trying to do there is really bring together the issuers, acquirers, and indeed the merchants to provide more of a 360-degree view across the payment chain, right? So if you think about data sharing inside, the enterprise, and I was just saying, okay, well, you really want to do that across all the different use cases, so you have the best possibility of running a good detection model for fraud. You also want to do that across industry players, and of course that's true in other use cases that we do, like money laundering as well, right? So our interest is in getting that network as large as possible and being able to leverage that as part of our services. So.
I just want to take a quick beat. Any questions from you guys yet? Any ways that you'd like to drive the conversation? David.
Yeah, Sean, you referred to these different channels, and each channel has its own layers. My question is, are the fraudsters better at getting into those different layers than the merchant or the security provider would be and staying on top of that? You know what I'm saying? We've had this conversation with more channels and more openings and gaps for fraud. If each channel has its own separate layers, it gets to be a complex thing that maybe only the fraudsters know what's going on.
So if I could distill your question, right? There in your purview, right? There are these gaps between these channels, and it's those gaps, those organizational gaps, where fraudsters are most successful. Sam?
So we have a name for that. It's called stitch together solutions. When you stitch together a solution, the seams, to your point, absolutely eloquently stated, allows people to come in. The more you have of integrated solutions that are properly designed, the better. But it really varies. The fraudsters are good at everything.
Yeah, let me borrow a concept from some of the other areas of enterprise security, which I think is a nice way of encapsulating this. I mean, what you're talking about is attack surface, right?
Yes.
At core, right? And so the width of the attack surface. So that for me would be a further validation of why you want to look across these channels. So yes, you're going to have strong security mechanisms in each channel, each payment type, blah, 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 to make sure you secure that to the extent you can. But you need to have this layer that's really looking across everything, that's trying to catch that stuff that you're not getting through there, and really look across your entire attack surface would be the way I would distill it.
Right. And I would also add that I think it's not just looking across yours, looking at the adjacent, your partners, your suppliers, and ensuring that you have a complete understanding of not just what your infrastructure and what you've done, but also what have they done to ensure that if there is data that's being exchanged, that it's just as secure as what you manage versus when it gets handed off.
Certainly for breach risk, just to add on to Michelle there, we know that quite a lot of things that happen right now happen because of third parties and securing that entire chain, and so that makes sense. And to go back to the sort of idea of looking across it again, you want to look at behavioral things that are out of whack and be able to integrate data to do that.
And if I could take this opportunity to build on this, these are the elements to your point. There's deterministic pieces of the system, like your HSM, which is the hardware security module that sits in every bank. There is a SIM card, there is a chip, and then in between there are connections to other vendors that you work with that you have to verify. There are analytics at the back end to help these devices actually be aware of potential attacks, new attacks, or change their behavior. So it's a collective of deterministic security, analytics, and figuring out where the seams are and how you test
Right.
for them and verify them.
Go ahead, Miss.
So, I have a question regarding the, enterprise security. You mentioned attack surfaces. Can you qualify a little bit what those attack surfaces, from an enterprise security perspective are? And then also an elaboration on behavioral analytics and where the data feeds of that behavior comes from, and how do you make sure that behavior is authentic?
Yeah, let me try and do the best I can on the sort of enterprise piece of it, because we're more of a payments thing. But let me just try a little bit, talk about that sort of attack surface from what my understanding is. So when you think about that, you think about any piece of data that's really out there, for example, customer stuff, or, domains that could be used for phishing or stuff like that actually exist out there. A lot of enterprises have a huge problem with what's called shadow IT, which is basically unrecognized, untracked, unmanaged, put up by somebody in some department, then they forgot about it, right? All of that creates breach risk for customers and things like that. And it's the old I left the USB key on the train type stuff. It's the same thing but digitally, right? So it's all the way across there. So the detection of stuff like that's going to come back to, again, looking for patterns of behavior in the actual customers once their data has been compromised, and then jumping on that from our perspective, from the point of view of Sam and Michelle, it might be earlier in the path. But that's the strength and depth that you need. But just think about that shadow IT world creating all this breach risk that's associated.
So just to one, so what we in payments call like behavioral analytics inside of the network, they call it like UBA, right? Like being able to track the behaviors of individual network employees for identity access management. So similar technologies, right? And then I think, Michelle, I think this might be an apt question for you. I mean, are some of your customers buying different types of solutions or wanting to acquire different types of solutions that may be traditionally fraud-based or traditionally security-based? Or is that changing at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think their security posture has changed. And again, going back to why, the breaches that have, it's been front page news.
Sure.
So it's changed the behavior. And going back to your question about the attack surface, it's just, again, it's really understanding. And I think you got the physical element of someone just being negligent and leaving, a USB, port wherever. But I think you also have the human behavior. And that's probably one of the biggest elements when you look at what causes breaches, is that some human being, us as consumers, were compromised because we fall for a phishing scam. We give out information to someone that we shouldn't have. And with that, they take the credentials or they take the information they're able to replicate. So again, when you look at the surface has absolutely increased in terms of broaden of where data sits, where it's in motion. And again, understanding where that is and how you track it and monitor it is absolutely fundamental. But I think you've got to really look at the consumer side and the employee side and think about the risk and vulnerabilities that you have with the employees that you have within your own organization and ensuring that you
And
have a
that's-
Go
plan.
ahead, Sam.
That's a
educate.
big deal, actually, what you just
Yes.
pointed out. We believe that the absence of tokenization of data is the reason for this. It seems like multiple partners now have our data. All of them have it in the clear somewhere. The solution that the payment industry has embraced a few years back, and it worked perfectly, is tokenization, where you actually take my piece of information that belongs to me, and you never store it. You store a token that points to it and is not related to it mathematically. So if it's lost, the data is not lost. The only entity that implemented that so far are the payment networks. That's how Apple Pay works. That's how Samsung Pay works. That's how all these guys work now. What yet to be seen is why not my Social Security is tokenized? Why not my password is tokenized? Why is it in the clear everywhere? That's something we don't understand.
Yeah, a large part of that, I think, Sam, comes from the bureaus and the way that they operate and their sort of lock on the market in terms of that sort of identity verification data and the way they think about that. It's an interesting issue, though, for cross-industry
When you look at
cooperation.
LifeLock, which is a great
Yeah.
example, LifeLock is trying to protect your data. They collect it and lose it. They've been sued many times. We've offered as a company a long time ago.
Sure.
We said, here's how Visa does it. It's really easy. We have the technology to do it. Do you want to do it? Maybe. And then they got acquired for billions of dollars. So who cares? So sometimes we're not really paying for real security. We're paying for just comfort. That's why you see the data out there, unfortunately.
Yeah, the other aspect of the data getting out there, I think, has a lot to do with most IT organizations still have a view in which they're trying to defend some sort of central core. And if you think about internal employees, what they're really trying to do a lot is get their jobs done. And so that's why you have all this shadow footprint and also potential.
There's also
breaches that grow.
monetization of data,
Yeah.
which is not a secret. I mean, the Googles of the world, Facebooks of the world, they want to monetize the data. They don't want it to be hidden. And Andreessen said a while back, at some point, we will have to go dark because this data has to be anonymous. I mean, it has to be up to me for you to be able to figure out my
And that's
password.
a whole,
A whole different-
conversation
yeah.
about digital identity.
Of course.
Come back in 15 minutes.
Absolutely, I will.
Yeah.
So Ian, I mean, what is, so I think this might be an app question. I mean, what is affecting the decision to deploy a specific solution inside of your customers, right? Like what's sort of the, either the catalytic event or that points someone toward analytics or points someone toward a different solution?
So for us, a lot of what we're doing right now is really ripping out what we would describe as sort of first generation role-based systems for fraud detection, right? And so these are systems that have a bunch of well-coded rules and setups and scenarios to basically look for various different fraud scenarios. This approach is not very agile and it's not very flexible and it's not very good at dealing, of course, with new forms of payments. And so what the customers from our perspective want is flexible and customizable machine learning models to do really greatly improved detection. And, you've got a question, I know, because on the end about,
Sure.
friction and, false positive reduction, all those kind of aspects, right? So, our customers are trying to create a frictionless experience with all these mobile payment mechanisms while retaining some sort of decent fraud performance, fraud detection performance, right? So they want to use machine learning and they want to use these techniques to actually do that. And, right now, if you're buying a system, the sort of thing that we do, you're really trying also to leverage your data science aspects and the people inside your organization who are able to do that kind of advanced analytics.
Sure. From your perspective, right? I think I know how you're going to answer this question, but I mean, is the industry viewing machine learning as an enabler or still as a black box? I mean, for some of your customers, are they really trying to tear the algorithm apart, or are they just sort of taking it as is out of the box?
So there's a huge spectrum of different kind of customers out there, right? You have, I like to describe this way. You have organizations who have data scientists who are people with Excel spreadsheets, and you have organizations with data scientists who are able to do deep learning using GPUs and are completely into it. I was talking to a customer last week that was on let's call it the far end of this spectrum, and they were a loan, primarily started as a loan origination company. They had a lot of expertise in what I would describe as very esoteric machine learning techniques. So it's out there. These customers want to be empowered. And so what we're trying to do is empower them to do that equally well. We also have customers who are more in the Excel spreadsheet one. So what we want to do is also provide some level of point and click stuff.
I think Ian is being very kind. Data scientists using spreadsheets are statisticians. The real data scientists are using GPUs. So it's
Well,
very nice of you.
Yes, but there's a huge difference in title as it's put out there.
We both carry the same title sometimes.
But you know you're absolutely right. I mean I would think of it as statisticians and sort of that data analyst role rather than data scientist. But you'd be surprised at the level in which
course,
data
yeah.
science maturity varies between organizations out there. And so we're trying to adjust to the whole thing. Right?
Michelle,
Yeah.
you look like you want to say something.
No, I was going to agree with Ian that I think that, and again, it varies by vertical or by practice. But again, machine learning, I think, is absolutely, it's not a black box. I think that there's proven value. I think that it's providing predictive analytics for a human to be able to react to. We've done a wide adoption across our entire infrastructure footprint, which again gives us insights to behavioral. You think about, we manage a global network. It gives us insight as to when there's going to be an incident or an issue on the network based on all of the analytics and what the machines are, what they're telling us, the probability of what's going to happen.
Sure. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about like kind of these large data feeds, right? I mean, what's actually most useful? What types of data are actually most useful in terms of thwarting fraud, right? Marketing data. I think about data in a few buckets, right? IOCs in terms of like cyber threat intelligence, and sometimes corporate security. Marketing data, right? I think all fraud data is marketing data, right? Tell me I'm wrong.
That all fraud data is marketing
It's just
data?
really great marketing data. And
There's
does it have that dual
probably,
use?
yeah, I mean, there's probably an element to that when, again, you think about phishing, you think about it just, again, human behavior, the way that we act, so that they have become very sophisticated. But I think there's also the opportunity is like, well, you're looking for the anomalies that you see across your entire organization around, again, the consumer, the way that they react, and then also, just in general, again, what you see across your entire network.
Ian?
So I used to have a role prior to joining FeedSci, which actually was exactly what you're talking about, which was trying to integrate, let's call it identity across marketing and fraud domains. And I still think that's very interesting, particularly in the cases where you don't have data at all, right? So, and let me clarify that comment a little bit. So if you're setting up, extending someone an account or taking a payment for the first time, you don't have data, right? So basically some of that novel type of data comes into the picture. I would say, though, a lot of what drives the customers that we have has nothing to do with the third-party data landscape or really pulling in data from the outside. It's actually mining the behaviors of the users, and you can do a tremendous amount just with that piece.
Exactly.
All right, you go
Go ahead.
you go to Facebook, you got your 3 security questions. You got your pet's name, your mother's maiden name,
Sure.
your date of birth. So it's marketing data, it's social media. Actually, and if you're doing a lot of channels to figure out probability of ID theft, for example, you look at sound alike names, associates. You look at death records. You look at election contributions. There's a lot of things. I mean, it's all out there. It's
Sure.
gobbledygook, and it's hard to, as you know more than I do, it's hard to interpret, but it's out there, and there's a ton of it.
Ian, we have limited time left, so really, if there are any questions from anyone, please. David, again, my good friend.
Michelle's comments made me think of this because I just finished writing about neuroscience as a defense layer, and these folks claim that they can tell what the intention is of the person doing a transaction. They can pick up on different characteristics of how they use a mouse, and combine that with the historical data of their transaction records and all that kind of stuff. But the neuroscientists are saying they think they come close to figuring it out. I just wonder what you think of that.
Well, I'm not familiar with the to that article in specific, but I do think, again, the common thread is that I do think we're gathering data, whether it's consumer behavior data, or whether it's just data in general that we see across, across the network. I think we're absolutely to the point that we're able to really anticipate based on those behaviors of what's going to happen next. And again, a simple example, again, I go back to just, again, we manage a global network. And before we would wait for something to break, now we can anticipate when something is going to get to a point of degradation that we can make the assessment, do the repair before it gets to the point that it's going to be customer impacting. So I think that absolutely, I think we're just going to continue. It's an evolution, and I think we're going to continue to learn from the information that we garner and the information that we share.
Yeah, to sort of add on to that, I mean, absolutely. The current vogue for sort of behavioral biometrics tools that are out there, and we, as I said, we think of these as partners that are integrated as part of an overall security play. I'm thinking of, BioCatch, Secure Touch. These are some of the people who are involved in this particular space. There are others as well, so if I didn't mention them, sorry. But basically, all those things can do things like detect from the data that's generated in the clickstream or in the way the user interacts with the app, enough information to typically detect a fraudster versus a non-fraudster, or a bot attack or something like that. And it's very much part of that layering and defense in depth. If you ally that with the machine learning technology, knowledge about the transaction, the user's behavior over that longer historical time, and even if you wanted to go back to Sean's point about additional third-party data, then you really have something which is very, very hard to defeat, because you have all these data points coming in, and then you have all this ability to take decisions across all these different things.
Without talking about science fiction, I have one last question for everyone. And Ian, I want to pose it to you. And
I
then
wanted to talk about science fiction.
Oh, come on, let's talk about science fiction.
No.
Ian, I think when most folks think about fraud, they think, and in mobile payments, they think about this rub between lowering fraud loss and increasing friction. I mean, in your view, is that true?
Well, I mean, I think, again, that's where these solutions come in to allow you to do both, right? I mean, in the end of the day, what you're trying to do is create the ultimate frictionless experience, right? Particularly now that we have huge proliferation of players and payment types. We spend a lot of time working with, we call them challenger banks, but, new generation mobile banking. And of course, their challenge is to be able to sign up accounts as fast as possible, to execute their business strategies and their plans, right? So they absolutely have to concentrate on that lowering friction thing, particularly in that account opening use case, right? If they don't do that, someone else will sign up with another provider, right?
So the new fraud buyer is a product manager. I love that. That's actually something that I'd really love to leave everyone with. But just listen, 30 seconds. One recommendation from each of you for the audience in terms of anything that you really want them to take away from, maybe action on when they go back to their organizations, to their companies, to their friends. Sam, I'll start with you.
I sell deterministic security, so
Buy it.
they buy deterministic security.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love that. Buy Magic Cube.
There
Go
you
ahead.
go.
Michelle.
I actually don't sell Magic Cube to enterprises, but again, it's what we do is similar to what a SIM card does, but it's extremely easy to deploy because it's virtual. So you can use it for IoT, you can use it for payments, you can use it for tokenization data and hiding data from being robbed from your side at all. You just have it tokenized, so you can actually query it without seeing it. So there's a lot of things you can do with it. I like deterministic things.
Awesome. Good. Michelle.
Yes. So what I would say is that you look at the adoption of mobile payments. You look at Gen Y, Gen Z. You look at the adoption there. They're not going to go away. They're just going to continue to use and engage with, whether it's the retailer, whether it's hospitality, airline, whatever it is. It's about ease and convenience. But the one common thread amongst all of the generations, including the baby boomers, is around security. So when something happens that is a bad thing for that particular brand, the retraction of spend, the retraction of just engagement, it falls off significantly.
Security is the foundation of
It's
service.
the foundation, regardless of generation, and mobile
foundation of
payments
service.
going to continue.
Uptime
It's not
and
going away.
reliability. Love
Yep.
it. Ian.
Yeah, you certainly need to trust Michelle. I would say, because I've been saying this already, basically get ready to gather together all your data, and make sure the data is in a good state to be able to do some more of these advanced fraud detection techniques and figure out how to do that. That's probably the best advice for an enterprise. And then think about empowering that data science layer to do that.
Great. All right, everyone clap. You guys, we're awesome.